frozen shoulder. Let me talk about a case that I had. A man in his 70s comes to my office. He fell off his bike, hit his shoulder hard. He hit it hard enough where they thought there might be a fracture, so that day he goes for x-rays. Nothing broken. Shoulder blade's fine, collarbone is fine, arm bone is fine. This is before he saw me. But he couldn't move his shoulder and his shoulder was in pain. So he got an evaluation, sent for physical therapy. Physical therapy worked the shoulder over well, but he still has frozen shoulder. Can't lift his arm up. Ends up in my office by referral. Now, when you hit the ground hard enough on your bike, falling that far, and you're in your 70s, do you think there's a potential that we could have injured our neck? Sure. And could that cause a frozen shoulder? Yes, I'll talk about the neurology in just a minute. So what happened, when he came in, I did my evaluation, I could see that he couldn't lift up his arm. He had already had physical therapy for his arm. He said, well, I'm not going to really pay attention much to the arm and the shoulder. You already had that done, and that didn't solve your problem. Let's take a look at your neck. I said, how's your neck? He said, pretty good. I mean, it's stiff, but it's pretty good. So I did my neck evaluation, and I found all kinds of problems, coincidentally, on the side that he fell and injured himself. So I started working only on his neck, and then within a couple of months, his arm was fine. His arm worked well, the range of motion came back, and the pain in the shoulder was gone. How did that work? A lot of it, if not all of it, was from a special cranial nerve called cranial nerve 11, the spinal accessory nerve. You don't have to follow everything I'm going to tell you, but just let me give you a little background. There are 12 pairs of cranial nerves. Cranial nerves are named because they originate, except for the spinal accessory nerve, they originate in the cranial vault from the brain. Okay? There are contributions to some of them in the brainstem and spinal cord, but that's where they originate. Now, the spinal accessory nerve is cranial nerve number 11, and it follows a unique pathway. It actually starts in the upper neck spinal cord. That's the origin. Then several of the levels from C1 to C6, several of the levels come out of the spinal cord, they come together, and it goes back up into the skull, traverses across, comes back down the skull out of another hole, and then it supplies a couple of neck muscles, the SCM muscle here and the trap muscle. And if those aren't working, particularly the trap muscle, you're going to have difficulty lifting up your arm. The problem might not be in the shoulder. Now, of course, a lot of cases of frozen shoulder absolutely are trauma and injury to the shoulder itself, with the ligaments and sprains, strains, and the rotator cuff and the labrum and all these things that you've all heard about. But when that gets a clean bill of health and there's no fractures and no injuries to the shoulder itself and therapy here doesn't work, well, let's look here, particularly in this man's history, and I've done this with other cases of frozen shoulder, but this is a classic one. In that case, there's no doubt he could have injured his neck. So when I worked on his neck, I didn't unpinch a pinched nerve. That's not what happened. I increased the traffic from the joints and the discs and all of the small muscles and tendons that are loaded with nerve endings, and I freed up and stimulated those nerve endings again, which ran right into the spinal cord at those same levels, activated those nerve cells that were quiet because they weren't being activated anymore to that spinal accessory nerve, which turned the wire back on, if you will, back to those muscles. And it didn't happen overnight either. Sometimes it does happen in one adjustment, and you can look on YouTube and the web, and you will see people with frozen shoulders going to a chiropractor, getting neck work, and they're actually moving their arm after one visit. In this one, because it had been some time, those muscles were atrophied and weak. So it took some time for that to come back. But when we worked his neck, we solved the problem. So the point is in some cases of frozen shoulder, one really should have the neck evaluated carefully. One of the prime practitioners to do that would be a chiropractor, and see if there's a relationship between the condition of the neck and the spinal accessory cranial nerve and the frozen shoulder. I'm Dr. Scott Fuller.